They knew it was happening. They saw the signs, but they couldn't stop it. Rome, Britain, America, three empires that controlled the world, three empires that missed the exact moment when everything changed. Not a war, not a revolution, the transition point. The invisible line where power doesn't just shift, it evaporates. And here's what terrifies historians. It always happens the same way. This video will show you the pattern, the specific mechanism that every dominant power in history has failed to recognize until it was too late. You'll see how Rome, at the height of its military strength, had already lost. How Britain, with the largest empire ever assembled, was ruling over ashes. And how America, right now, is on the wrong side of a transition it refuses to acknowledge. We're not talking about decline. Decline is slow. Decline is manageable. This is about the transition point, the moment when the systems that created power become the systems that destroy it. And the brutal truth is this: the people inside the empire are always the last to see it. Let's start with Rome, 117 AD. The empire reaches its maximum territorial extent under Trajan. Borders stretch from Scotland to the Persian Gulf. Over 50 million people live under Roman rule. The legions are undefeated. The treasury is full. Roman engineering, law, and culture dominate the known world. Everyone inside the empire believes it will last forever. They have good reason to believe this. Rome has existed for 800 years. It has survived civil wars, foreign invasions, economic crises, and a political chaos. Every time it emerges stronger. But something has already changed. Something invisible. The transition point came earlier, decades earlier, and almost no one noticed. Here's what happened. Rome's power was built on a specific economic model: conquest, expansion. New territory meant new resources, new slaves, new tribute, new markets. The entire Roman system, from military wages to grain subsidies to monumental construction, depended on continuous growth through conquest. But around 100 AD, Rome stopped expanding, not because it was weak, because it reached natural barriers: dense forests in Germania, vast deserts in Africa. The Parthian Empire in the east, too strong and too far to conquer, the North Sea, the Atlantic. The machine kept running, but the fuel stopped flowing. Now here's the mechanism most people miss. Rome didn't collapse because barbarians invaded. Barbarians had always invaded. Rome didn't collapse because of corruption. Corruption had always existed. Rome collapsed because its core economic model became obsolete, and the entire system was too rigid to adapt. Without new conquests, there were no new slaves. Slave labor was the foundation of Roman agriculture and industry. Without new territory, there was no new tribute. Tribute funded the legions. Without expansion, land prices stagnated, then fell. Land was the primary store of wealth for the elite. The Roman economy started to contract, slowly at first. Tax revenues declined. The state debased the currency to maintain spending. Inflation destroyed savings. The middle class, already small, disappeared. Wealth concentrated in fewer hands. Political instability increased. And here's the plot twist. Rome's military remained strong for another 200 years. The legions still won battles. The borders still held. But the economic foundation had already cracked. The empire was running on momentum, not power. By the time the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, the city had been irrelevant for a century. The capital had moved, the economy had collapsed, the population had crashed. The sack was a spectacle, but the empire had already died at the transition point, 3 centuries earlier, when expansion stopped and no one built a new model. Rome missed it. The emperors, the senators, the generals, they all missed the moment when their system of power generation stopped working. Now, Britain, 1920. The British Empire covers 1/4 of the Earth's land surface. 450 million people live under British rule. The Royal Navy controls every ocean. British coal powers the industrial world. London is the financial capital of the planet. The sun never sets on the empire, but Britain has already lost. The transition point has already passed, and just like Rome, almost no one inside the empire can see it. Here's the backstory. Britain's dominance was built on a specific advantage: industrial technology. For roughly a century, from 1780 to 1880, Britain was the only nation that could produce manufactured goods at scale. This monopoly created enormous wealth. Britain didn't just sell products, it controlled the infrastructure of global trade. British ships, British insurance, British banks, British coal stations. The entire system was self-reinforcing. Industrial profits funded naval expansion. Naval power protected trade routes. Protected trade routes generated more profits. The empire grew not primarily through military conquest, but through economic leverage. But the advantage was always temporary. Technology spreads, and by 1890 it had spread. Germany and the United States industrialized, not just partially, completely. And they industrialized with newer equipment, better organization, and cheaper labor. By 1900, the United States produced more steel than Britain. By 1910, Germany's chemical and electrical industries were more advanced than Britain's. Britain was still the largest empire, but it was no longer the most productive economy. And in the industrial age, productivity is power. The First World War revealed the transition. Britain won, but only with American finance and American manufacturing. The war cost Britain 1/4 of its national wealth. The empire emerged victorious but bankrupt. And here's what no one wanted to admit. Britain had been borrowing against future power it no longer possessed. The 1920s looked successful. The empire expanded, absorbing former German and Ottoman territories. British diplomats carved up the Middle East, but beneath the surface, the numbers told a different story. Britain owed the United States more money than the entire British economy produced in a year. British industry was obsolete. Investment had stopped during the war and never recovered. The young men who would have become engineers and entrepreneurs were dead, 4 million casualties across the empire. The colonies, once profitable, had become expensive. India cost more to administer and defend than it generated in revenue. Military commitments had tripled, while the tax base had stagnated. Britain was paying for a global empire with a regional economy. And here's the mechanism. Britain tried to maintain its status through financial engineering, the gold standard, imperial preference, currency controls. But you cannot finance your way out of a productivity gap. Money is a claim on real resources, and Britain was producing fewer real resources than its competitors, while spending more to defend a system that had already stopped generating wealth. The Second World War finished what the First World War started. Britain won again. But by 1945, the empire was insolvent. Within 20 years, almost every colony was independent, not because of military defeat, because the cost of control exceeded the value of dominance. Britain missed the transition point. It happened around 1890, when industrial advantage disappeared. Everything after that was momentum, impressive momentum, the appearance of power. But the foundation had already shifted. Now America, 2025. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because we're living through it. The United States emerged from World War II with an unprecedented advantage. 50% of global manufacturing capacity, 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, the only major economy with intact infrastructure, unmatched military power, control of the new international institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. But more important than any of these, the United States controlled the reserve currency. Here's what that means. After 1944, international trade was conducted in dollars. If France wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, the transaction happened in dollars. If Japan wanted to buy steel from Germany, dollars. This created permanent demand for American currency, which meant the United States could print money to to pay for imports without triggering inflation because the world needed those dollars for trade. This is extraordinary power. It allowed America to run massive trade deficits while maintaining currency stability. It allowed the government to borrow at artificially low interest rates. It allowed American consumers to buy foreign goods with printed paper, while foreign producers accumulated that paper as reserves. The entire system was self-reinforcing. Dollar dominance required military power to enforce. Military power required spending. Spending required borrowing. Borrowing was cheap because the dollar was the reserve currency. The loop was closed. And for 40 years, it worked perfectly. American living standards rose. American companies dominated global markets. American culture spread worldwide. The Soviet Union collapsed without a war. By 1995, the United States was the sole superpower, and the end of history was announced. But the transition point had already passed, just like Rome, just like Britain, and just like those empires, almost no one noticed. Here's what changed. The foundation of American power was not military force. It was productive superiority. The United States made things the world wanted to buy: cars, computers, airplanes, machinery, pharmaceuticals. And because American products were superior, the world needed dollars to buy them. But starting in the 1980s, American manufacturing began to relocate, not slowly, systematically. Factories closed, supply chains moved to Asia, entire industries disappeared: steel, textiles, electronics, shipbuilding. This was presented as progress, efficiency, comparative advantage. America would focus on high-value services and innovation. Other countries would make the physical goods. Everyone would benefit from trade. The economic theory was elegant. The reality was different. Here's the mechanism. When you offshore production, you offshore the knowledge embedded in production. Manufacturing is not just assembly. It's process engineering, quality control, supply chain integration, workforce skills. When the factories left, the expertise left, and once expertise leaves, it doesn't come back easily. By 2010, the United States could not produce most of its own essential goods: pharmaceuticals, computer chips, medical equipment, rare earth elements. Even basic items like screws and fasteners were imported. And here's the plot twist. This happened during a period of apparent American dominance. The stock market reached record highs. Tech companies became the most valuable in the world. American military spending exceeded the next 10 countries combined. But the foundation had shifted. The United States was still the richest country on paper. But paper wealth and productive power are not the same thing. Paper wealth is a claim on future production. If you can't produce, the claim becomes worthless. Now add the second factor, debt. In 1980, total American debt, public and private, was about 150% of GDP, high but manageable. By 2025, it exceeds 350%. The federal government alone owes more than $35 trillion. State and local governments owe trillions more. Corporations are leveraged at record levels. Household debt is at record levels. This debt was accumulated during a period of artificially low interest rates, made possible by reserve currency status. But the system has a built-in trap. As debt grows, more resources must be devoted to servicing that debt. As more resources go to debt service, less is available for productive investment. As productive investment declines, growth slows. As growth slows, debt becomes harder to service. You enter a cycle. And the only way to continue is to print more currency, which works as long as the world accepts that currency. But acceptance depends on confidence, and confidence depends on productive power. Now the third factor, competition. China's economy in 1980 was smaller than Italy's. By 2025, it's the world's largest manufacturer, the largest trader, the largest holder of foreign exchange reserves. China produces more steel than the rest of the world combined, more ships, more solar panels, more electric vehicles, more smartphones. This is not just catch-up growth. China is moving into advanced sectors: semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, aerospace. And unlike the United States, China is still building infrastructure, factories, research capacity. The response from American leadership has been predictable: sanctions, tariffs, technology controls, military posturing. The assumption is that American power is permanent, and any challenge can be managed through policy. But this is the same mistake Rome made, the same mistake Britain made. Policy cannot reverse a transition point. Policy is downstream of productive capacity. If you cannot produce, you cannot project power, no matter how sophisticated your policy. Now, here's where we are. The United States maintains military bases in 80 countries. It has security commitments across the globe. It spends more on defense than it spends on everything except Social Security and Medicare. But this spending is financed with borrowed money, and the borrowing is only possible because of reserve currency status. And reserve currency status depends on the world's willingness to hold dollars. That willingness is eroding, not rapidly but measurably. More countries are conducting trade in other currencies. More central banks are diversifying reserves away from dollars. More international agreements are bypassing the dollar system entirely. Each individual step is small. The cumulative effect is massive. When reserve currency status ends, the entire model collapses. The United States will not be able to print money to pay for imports. It will not be able to borrow at low rates. It will face a choice/spending, including military spending, or trigger hyperinflation. Either choice ends the era of American dominance. And just like Rome, just like Britain, the end will seem sudden. But it won't be sudden. It will be the inevitable result of a transition point that was missed decades ago. So what is the pattern? What is the mechanism that keeps repeating? Every dominant power builds its position on a specific advantage. Rome had military organization and expansion. Britain had industrial technology. America had productive superiority and reserve currency status. The advantage creates a system. The system generates wealth and power. The wealth and power reinforce the system. For a while it seems permanent. But the advantage is always temporary. Technology spreads. Competitors adapt. Resources deplete. Geography constrains. When the advantage disappears, the system becomes a trap. All the institutions, all the commitments, all the assumptions were built for a world that no longer exists. But the people inside the system cannot see this. They see the monuments, the military, the prestige. They see the appearance of power. And they keep operating as if nothing has changed. They increase spending to maintain status. They borrow against a future that won't arrive. They make commitments they cannot keep. This is the transition point, not when the empire falls, when the foundation shifts and the leadership doesn't adjust. After the transition point, everything becomes reactive. You're no longer building, you're defending. And defense is always more expensive than offense. You spend more to achieve less. The gap between commitments and capacity widens. Debt grows faster than income, and eventually something breaks. For Rome, it took 3 centuries. For Britain, 50 years. For America, the timeline is faster because everything moves faster. Communication, trade, technology, financial systems. We don't have centuries. We might not have decades. Here's what makes this moment different. We have the historical record. We know exactly how this process works. We know what Rome missed. We know what Britain missed. We know the warning signs, and we're ignoring them. The political class is focused on short-term management, the next election, the next budget cycle, the next crisis. There is no long-term strategy because long-term strategy would require admitting the transition has already happened. The financial system is built on assumptions that are no longer valid. Perpetual growth, dollar dominance, stable geopolitics. These assumptions are embedded in every pension fund, every insurance company, every bank balance sheet. Questioning them would trigger immediate collapse. The public is distracted by spectacle, culture wars, partisan conflict, celebrity scandals, anything except the underlying shift in productive power and resource control. This is not a conspiracy. It's a coordination failure. Everyone is optimizing for their individual position within a system that is collectively failing. And the system is too complex, too interconnected, too fragile to reform without triggering the collapse it's trying to prevent. So, we get paralysis, symbolic gestures, incremental adjustments, and the gap between reality and narrative grows wider. Rome didn't fall to barbarians. Rome fell because it couldn't adapt its system to a world without expansion. Britain didn't lose its empire to rebels. Britain lost its empire because it couldn't adapt its system to a world without industrial monopoly. And America will not lose its position to a military defeat. America will lose its position because it cannot adapt its system to a world without productive dominance and reserve currency privilege. The transition point is not coming, it's already here. We're living on the wrong side of it, and every day that passes without fundamental restructuring makes the eventual adjustment more violent. So what do you do with this information? You stop believing the narrative. The narrative says everything is fine, or will be fine, or can be fixed with the right policy. The narrative is designed to maintain order, not describe reality. You look at the fundamentals: productive capacity, resource flows, debt levels, currency movements, energy costs. These are the variables that matter. You understand that institutions will not save you. Institutions are designed to preserve themselves, not protect individuals. When the system shifts, institutions shift with it or collapse. Either way, your loyalty to them is not reciprocated. You build resilience at the personal level, skills that create value in any system, resources that hold value across systems, networks that function when institutions fail. You recognize that this is not pessimism, this is realism. Empires rise and fall, systems change. Pretending otherwise doesn't change the pattern, it just makes you unprepared. And you ask yourself the question that matters. If Rome missed it, if Britain missed it, if America is missing it, what are you missing right now? What transition point in your own life, your own choices, your own assumptions have you already passed without realizing it? Because the mechanism scales. It works at every level: personal, corporate, national, imperial. The advantage that created your success is temporary. The system you built around that advantage will become a trap, and the longer you wait to adapt, the more violent the transition becomes. Rome had centuries, you have less. The transition point doesn't announce itself, it doesn't wait for you to be ready, it just passes, and everything after is consequence.